Phase one of the Four Maine Coalition included the establishment of a roadmap of the future of forestry. There were some specific goals and strategies and tactics that were laid out. And that became the work of the number of committees and the work going into those committees, the reports that come out and the accountable metrics and the reporting. Some of those goals that were established in that first phase is increasing the economic impact to the state. You may have heard Steve Schley say this morning that there is I think there's a $4 billion increase slated in terms of a measurable outcome of the activity of investment in overall economic impact to the state. One of the other goals is managing responsibly. You've heard in a few different presentations today the importance of sustainability, the importance of responsible management and oversight and practice. Preparing the workforce. You don't have to be in forestry to understand that there is a workforce concern. There's a workforce challenge. And much of what we're talking to in Four Maine certainly is looking down the road on how to introduce new technologies, innovations, and skills. But the workforce challenge is real. The workforce challenge is right now. The workforce challenge is trying to get enough labor to provide the work that's already on the table. And so moving forward with purpose as to how to address the short, medium, and long-term needs of workforce is part of this coalition. Community prosperity, we have a number of forest product communities in our state that have certainly been affected as mills and what used to be the norm goes away. There is some fantastic resurgence and vibrancies and local work being done to rebirth these areas. And certainly Four Maine is including that effort in those communities and trying to help support and nurture and do what's possible to bring those communities back. And then, as I mentioned in my opening, organizing the partners has been the most impressive part for me because I might be cynical by nature, and that just might be my main roots. But knowing that this coalition came together and has stayed together and brings partners from different perspectives, different angles, and different intents is impressive. And so they've been able to commit to those. Once that roadmap was published, the ability for the next level to take place is a communication strategy amongst other deliverables and goals. And that's our role. And so we are working specifically with the communications committee and liaison to the executive committee in doing a on-purpose communication plan and strategy, specifically on three different areas. First is we want to increase the overall public awareness. In our market, I heard Ashley and Jeffrey in the market attraction breakout earlier talk about the international market. Our concern and our focus is inside the state. So that's the partnership there is what happens inside the state. So raising public awareness to what's happening, what has been happening, and what could be happening in our backyard is one of our goals. I'm going to mention workforce again. Not only do we want to entice, if you will, Maine as a place to move to and invest in, but we want folks that are here to see the forest products industry, or to continue to see the forest products industry as a viable place for their careers, for their jobs, and for their interests. So if they haven't been thinking about it now, how do we get them interested? If they're not interested in being in the woods, how do we entice them by showing them the high level of engineering, the high level of innovation, the high level of tech that goes into this to change what may be an old-fashioned view of the industry? And certainly investment attraction. You may have heard Jeffrey and Ashley reference some supporting materials, and they're doing some fantastic stuff. And it's interesting to see the market, the international market, look at Maine, and anything we can do to support those efforts to make sure that the interest is available, that the interest is met with prominence is where we step up. So I think it's important to, when we talk about communicating and looking at the opportunity, is understanding what the opportunity is, right? And we have to look at it as a balance, because we can't just look at it as a fiscal note. We can't just say that at any means possible, we're going to increase the economic impact. It's a balance. And one of the balances that the industry as a whole needs to look at is the balance of wildlife and the environment and recreation in terms of the woods as a whole, as the forest as a whole, the economy. Right? But even inside the industry itself, um, we have balances of perspectives and needs and goals. And so we have industry and we have innovation and R&D, and then we have the actual work being done. And so it's not simple to just say, this is our message, this is our voice, everyone buy in or else. It's a collection of varying perspectives, a collection of varying needs. What do people need to see and hear? And then addressing those audiences as best as possible with the information that we know to be true, right? I heard Ashley in the market attractiveness one talking about how important it is for Maine to be prepared, and I couldn't agree more. One of the guiding philosophies of our firm is what we call persuasive and prepared, and that is persuasive is anything we do to get attention. It's look at me, look at me, look at me. And then the prepared is what happens when that attention is actually received, right? And so the ability for us to earn attention and then deliver value is very important. I did hear Ashley mention that we're not just competing with New Hampshire and Georgia and Michigan, we're competing with the world. And so one thing I know about economic development these days is that you don't get days or weeks, you might get hours. And if you're not ready, if you're not prompt, if you're not prepared in advance to answer questions, provide value, and give the resources that are requested in a timely manner, you may just not even be on the next round. And honestly, it could come down to hours. And so one of the things that the coalition has that I'll reiterate is a tremendous amount of expertise and experience in knowing what those questions might be and knowing what those resources are. And in knowing what's going to be asked. And if we can reverse engineer that to the best of our ability to make sure that those are ready in a moment's notice, right, in the minute thing, rather than trying to make it up each time, then Maine has a competitive advantage when it's dealing with not only a domestic, but an international opportunity. In Maine, we have a phrase called hard telling, not knowing. And that is a fancy way of just saying, I don't know, right? And so as we start this process in talking to the Maine public and talking to the audiences that we're talking about, we have our assumptions, but we don't know what we don't know. And so we started with a benchmark. And so I'm going to review with you an effort that we took place in to establish that benchmark back in 2020. The initial intent of the benchmark was a combination of surveys and in-person focus groups. But you may have read that there was a global pandemic that kind of changed the plans of many companies, and this initiative being one of them. And so this became more of a virtual online rather than in person. But I'm proud to say that, as you can see here, there were 485 folks from across the state that participated. And you can see by the shading that the different colors represent the amount of activity that came from different areas. And so the four corners of the state were well distributed and people participated, which offers a good balance, right? And we were looking at a number of different initiatives that were looking at reputation, optimism, and awareness as I silence my phone. And so the report, the survey insight report that I'm speaking to now, that I'm just going to show you some highlights and give you some insights and perspectives, as well as other reports you heard Jeffrey and other folks say are available at formaine.org. And so I'm just going to spend some time looking at a few of the pieces that we'll pull out to give context to today's conversation, but there's a little bit more in the report itself. So the first thing that we did is we asked the general public about industry optimism. And the question was, what is your perception of growth opportunities of these industries in Maine? We wanted to start out by asking about forestry in particular, but we wanted to add more context. So, excuse me, the reason that we added 4 other industries is to give some relative comparison to agricultural, healthcare, tourism, and manufacturing. And what we found interesting here is that forestry was right in the middle in terms of optimism and pessimism. Tourism being the most favorable in terms of the collective optimistic meter, if you will, with manufacturing being the least. And then forestry was closer to agriculture. Our takeaway in looking at the data at a different level or a deeper level was we have seen significant investments in public outreach tourism lives by that. Like that is the nature by which their industry survives. So it's not unusual to see that being the most widely understood and optimistic, because we see the numbers in front of us every year, and perhaps even quarterly if you're in the hospitality, service, tourism. Agriculture has benefited recently from an uptick on understanding sourcing of food, highlighting the local food movement, the farmers. You've seen some large retailers, grocery stores, kind of highlighting the source of their food. There's been a movement to fresher, local, whatnot, and it's grown in terms of awareness and optimism. So to see forestry being alongside agriculture is a positive, but certainly there's room to move, as we see from here. The next question I wanted to highlight that we went through the survey was a slider. And so we presented a number of slider questions where the survey taker could slide to the left or the right. And in this case, sliding to the left, the closer you got to 0, you were choosing stale. And the closer you get to 100 to the right, you're choosing innovative. And the answer is right in the middle on this particular one, which is why I wanted to show it. And the question was, the Maine forest products industry's attitude towards growth is what? Is it stale or innovative? And the majority of the answers are right down the middle. And again, a deeper dive, we asked folks for every question why they answered the way they are. And much of the responses came around the area of, I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't have information to really support my decision. This is just how I feel, right? It's probably important to say as well that more than 50% of the folks that we asked are not involved in the forest products industry. So we did want to make sure that this wasn't an insulated report where it was just industry folks representing the feedback. It was a good mix. In fact, I think it was like 55% of the folks did not represent themselves or a family member inside the industry. I wanted to share, if you haven't seen this, Donna's TED Talk is on the website at formaine.org, and it speaks to the next generation of wood innovation, and it's well worth. It's a 5-minute. It's a fantastic video. Donna is a 30+ year veteran of the forest products industry and really has some amazing insights. But what she talks about in terms of using wood fiber for modeling for medical purposes and bone and textures and all the future what's coming is well worth watching. And it's a very succinct and well done presentation of the opportunity that lives within wood fiber and what's happening in the innovation in Maine. And I bring that up because another question that we asked of the group was, wood fibers can be used in a variety of ways. Can you tell us which ones you've heard of, right? And again, the further to the right, the greater the consensus of people that answered on that question. And so you would expect construction and lumber and whatnot to be well understood, and it is. But as we get into bioplastics and medical supplies and chemicals and cosmetics, you start to see the numbers get less and less. And what it tells us is the opportunity to tell greater stories, whether it be biofuels or whether it be food, or whether it be the 3D printing capabilities that are going to enable the manufacturing to do things in a cheaper and faster way. All of those are ripe for the picking, and we need to move the needle, to a greater number. And this gives us, again, the baseline for our work moving forward. The essence of the work that is being done in those innovation labs of how you take the wood fibers and turn them into something else, a replacement for traditional fossil fuels or the clothing and the stuff we're talking about is nanocellulose, which I didn't go to forestry school, so I'm not going to repeat the definition of what nanocellulose is. That doesn't tell you it's a very amazing thing that comes from wood that allows you to create a number of bioeconomic components, which is fantastic. Inside the forest bioproducts research, though, there's people much smarter than me, fortunately, that are doing some amazing things. And so the outcome of their investment is getting noticed at a federal level. And so this is an article that recently came out about, close to a $5 million investment that's going to allow the innovation and research of nanocellulose inside our state to bolster and grow, which is relative to a question that we asked in the survey. In the last 12 months, have you watched, read, or seen a news story pertaining to nanocellulose? And at least two thirds of the respondents said no. So we know that there's a disconnect between the essence of the fiber that is being used in very innovative ways in the bioeconomy to replace biofuels and to go in a different direction with wood fiber, and what the public has heard about and understands to be true, and that gives us some bench lines. Sustainability is a large topic for many different reasons, and the state of Maine, with more than 50% of its forests being certified sustainable, leads the nation. That's the largest percentage of any state in the nation, and that's important because you may have heard, I think it was Ashley speaking in the investment of the international market attraction, that above tax breaks, above labor force, above what you would consider to be traditional economic development requests, topics, and concerns on the checklist, the political position on sustainability, the practice of sustainability is an important factor when it comes to choosing Maine over other options in the world, right? And so one of the things that we asked is, how well does the public understand what's happening in our own backyard? So we asked them from a reputation point of view, do you agree or not agree that timberland owners in Maine use responsible and sustainable harvesting management practices? And it came back an overwhelmingly yes on the agree and strongly disagree. Strongly agree or agree, you've got almost 3/4 of the respondents in that bucket. So that is understood to be true. We are happy to see that message. What that means is we don't dismiss it. We still need to keep saying it, but not as much work is needed to get the opinion to be where it needs to be. In fact, we can reinforce it quite easily because we know that there's a strong position there already. And so as we move from timberland owners, obviously we get into the field and we want to look at professional logging contractors, and does the public feel the same way? So we asked them that question, and they do. It's relatively the same response. And so we know moving forward that the work being done in the woods and the folks that are managing and overseeing the woods, from the point of Maine public in the survey, and again, there's no gospel, this is just benchmarks and this is a piece of the pie. But we know that the relative sample that we got says that people understand and appreciate the sustainable and responsible way in which our foresters and landowners go about their job, which is a good place to start. And then optimism, we talk about workforce. And so we asked them, would you recommend that Maine students consider a career in a forest-related occupation? And I'm going to be honest, this one surprised me. This was an overwhelming yes. And I thought I would see more of a 50-50. And so this is a very optimistic look. It was a very encouraging look. And as we leave here, there's some insights that we can take away from it, right? So we get to now what? We've done this benchmarking, we've got the data, we've done the insights. And our takeaways here for the industry as a whole, as we look to set a foundation for the communication plan, is we feel that the reputation of the industry as a whole and the people within it are high. There's a high level of respect for the work that they do. There's a high level of respect for the responsible and sustainable nature in which they go about their business. And as you see by the last slide, would you recommend folks take students consider a career in forestry? Saying yes, there's optimism. So, but as we saw on the first slide, we don't know much about it. So the optimism is kind of tepid. So we're at medium there. We think that that's optimism can be improved. But awareness is low. As we saw going in, the awareness of what's happening outside of what we would consider to be traditional norms of forestry is not as high as we want. So from a reputation point of view, we're starting from a good place. From optimism, Mainers are basically, I'll believe it when I see it type of people anyway. And so having it be medium is a good place to start. We know we can work from there. And the awareness is the lowest part of, if you haven't been paying attention and you don't participate in forestry discussions, you probably wouldn't know that there are a number of things being born from trees that will present tremendous value added and market opportunity. I mentioned at the beginning, persuasive and prepared is one of the guiding principles that we practice. And so when we talk about earning attention and delivering other value, I want to come back to that because the way in which we do that, it looks like I'm missing a graphic here, but we are talking to the public, and I feel like I'm in a Dilbert cartoon. Like, imagine if this was here, this is what you'd see. So there was stories, right? So there's stories that we're pushing out in terms of our relationship in the For Maine coalition. We are talking with the media as well as sharing and promoting. So we are another megaphone as other investments are taking place and other stories come out. We're using that megaphone within the industry to promote that. And if this was here, you would see that there was a story about that investment that we've been promoting. We have a large effort in social media, both in LinkedIn from the professional circle and more of a social circle in Facebook. And we have an editorial calendar where we're pushing it out. On top of sharing stories, having relationships with the media, and having public events like this, we haven't engaged yet in a paid outreach. I assume that's coming. That's part of the plans for 2.0. But at the moment, there isn't a large, what you would consider a classic advertising campaign. From the persuasive and prepared, this is the other half of the ad that I opened up with. And so what we are trying to do is in the visuals that we're creating and the messaging that we're creating is balance the visual approach. We are trying to communicate to a younger workforce. We want to get interest and intrigue and see people like me in the industry. Combining with interesting headlines to get that intrigue, what does that mean? And then when we share that the Maine forest is full of opportunity, we have to defend that. We have to defend that and define it. And so what we talk about is today's trees are replacing plastic and sustainable fossil fuels and advancing medical technology. It's also getting into carbon sequestration, the carbon thing, sequestration. I always get that word wrong. And then we drive them, right? And we want to talk about meeting global demands because what we want to do is make sure that the Maine public understands that the opportunity here is global. It's not just within our state. These are a couple pieces we talked about. The strategic investment. We don't spend much time here, but certainly we want to be supportive of those needs. And so a couple pieces that got developed with Indofor or for Indofor as they work with Maine and Company and try to look at an international audience coming in. We want to make sure that we are positioning the state to be ready, providing the information, looking good on paper, as well as any other resources. You talk the database and online tools to make sure that the folks that are looking at our state get the information they need, can see success, and are ready to talk with us. So take a breath, exhale. The core messages as we move forward. There's 5 core messages that we build our communications plan off. And as we talk to the communications committee, as we do the work with the press, as we talk with industry stakeholders and the public at large, we come back to our pillars. We come back to our our anchor statements, which are sustainability. We want to make sure that we are referencing and repeating and enhancing messages of sustainability. We want to promote, share, and educate on in-state resources, and that could be the R&D centers, like what's taking place at UMaine. It could be access to the actual wood, right? Or it could be infrastructure, it could be companies, could be capital. But we want to come back to in-state resources. We want to position this as the place to get what you need. Wood fiber versatility, that's the basically the extension of, did you know that nanocellulose is becoming this? Or did you know that wood is powering jets? Or biofuels of some level, or cosmetics, clothing, and the things that are coming, replacing traditional fossil fuels. We want to reinforce the fact that there are career opportunities, not only now, but in the future, right? And so what the industry looks like 10 years from now may not be what it looks like now. In fact, we know it won't be. And so what's coming down the road, right? And so there's a workforce report that was being presented today by Dr. Wallace, and that'll be posted on the site following the summit, that talks about what we have, what we need, and where we're going. And how do you shape communication in the legislative policy area to make sure that our legislators and public policymakers are not only aware, but schooled in how their actions could impact where we need to go. And then, of course, the global impact. We want folks to know that the market is more than just Maine. In our audience, as I talked about, as we put all this together, it's not just one message to one person. We're talking about a variety of audiences. So we've got legislative and communities and industry folks, investment and workforce. With the workforce, it's terrifically important to remember that not everybody wants to wear a lab coat and work in an innovation center. This is a picture from the Mechanized Logging Operators Program, which is a community college professional logger council program to teach people to use this high-tech, advanced material equipment in the woods. Right? These are real jobs and real opportunities available now, and understanding that audience track, that it's not all about science. It's not all about the big fancy new shiny stuff. If we don't have experienced, skilled people committed to getting the job done in the woods and doing it in a safe and responsible way, then the ability for us to deliver on that promise is shortened. And so the ability for us to be persuasive and prepared extends to workforce as well, but we have to talk to people in certain ways that are relatable, which is why I highlighted it here. So as we talk about diversity, imagination I put here because in our efforts to talk about new and innovative ways of how wood fibers are going to be turned into global markets, I can't see it yet. So at some point we have to have imagination and kind of bring it down to something that I can relate to. And in closing, and I don't know where we are on time, but in closing, it's as we put this plan together and we execute it and we share resources with industry folks and we work with Maine and we talk with the press and whatnot, it's important to know that we are all messengers in the state. And as a collective group, why that's important is back to that persuasive and prepared. If we look at the efforts of Maine and Company and Indu4 and the University of Maine and lead generating activities, if they do bring opportunity and investment conversations to the state, and those folks are met with lowercase I ignorance, if they're met with folks that can't communicate and aren't aware and don't know, then our ability to recruit the quarterback, if you will, and compete on a global basis is diminished. So the more that we know, the more that we can share, the more that we understand, even at a very basic 8th grade level, the ability for us to relate to that is strong, and it matters. We have to consider the variety of perspectives that we've talked about. Collectively sharing behind the curtain. One of the things that I see not only in this industry, but other businesses is the stuff that you do each and every day doesn't seem exciting to the people that are doing it, but it's relevant, right? It's relevant and real. And so to be understood, we have to share. And the everyday does have value. So the things that we're putting in, whether it be the woods or the mills or the landowners or the labs or wherever we're going to be, the stuff that we consider to be routine and everyday is the stuff that we need to expose, because sincerity and transparency is how we're going to invite other people that might be interested in that to come to the table and explore for the first time. So I'm going to stop there and take it back to questions. And Sue, I don't know if you want to moderate questions or not, but I'm certainly happy to take any if there are.
There is a question or a statement from Joe Short. He said, forest industries are frequently misunderstood and misrepresented in the sphere of public opinion beyond Maine when it comes to environmental and climate impacts. The don't cut a tree constituency is real, and there is a risk that well-intentioned environmental and climate policies would harm the forest industry and the growth of everyone. If we're talking about it today, as using wood is seen as part of the problem instead of the solution. How are the Maine communications considering and addressing this dynamic?
I think what you're asking about is one of the balance concerns that we talked about at the beginning, which is it can't be all about profit. It's got to have a balance of recreation and wildlife and environmental, but not to the point of sacrificing opportunity for common sense. So we recognized, not only in forest products, but in other industries, that there are polar opinions on both sides, right? And to kind of navigate that does take some political prowess, but the ability to recognize it as being a real concern is important. So to dismiss it only elevates the polar nature of the discussion, but to understand how we work in concert with environmental concerns is important. And I think I was reading one of Pat Strout's comments or letters the other day, and one of the facts that surprised even me that needs to make the roster of what we talk about is there's more conserved land in the state of Maine than the Everglades and Yellowstone put together. So there's over 4 million acres of that conservation effort being taken place, which is more than those two large nationally recognized conservation efforts altogether. So I think what you do is you just keep telling the truth, you keep listening and respecting other people's opinions, but you don't let those polar opinions get in the way of good action if you believe to be responsible and sustainable. Now, that being said, the reason one of the audiences that we have on the list, we recognize it's not just industry and the public. One of those key audiences is legislative and public policy, because having sat behind the podium myself, having been both a councilor and mayor at a small scale, I understand full well how 6 people with a very strong opinion in a city of 35,000 can impact a decision. Oftentimes the other 34,994 people are not taken into consideration in the moment because they're not looking in the eye. And so the emotional impact and pressure to make a decision when someone's looking at you with a strong opinion is real. So one of our goals then would be to include public policy folks, legislative and whatnot, industry and coalitions outside of Fort Maine in the narrative, so that we can build a strong case to, if you want to say this, offset the polar concerns or complement and address it. I think that's how I look at it. So I hope that answers your question.
Are there any more questions?
Cary, Sue, this is Yellow. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi, Yellow.
One of the questions I always have is knowing that it's not a linear or smooth transition. In other words, there's going to be some market segments and even some mills that will continue to struggle in the coming years, even while we're hoping to take 2-3 steps forward for everyone back. How do you cabin? I feel like people react to the negative because of the past history and that narrative you led with, Cary. How do we counteract that narrative? Here we go again. They were blowing smoke.
So I call it the Empire Falls, concern, which is, if you remember Russo's book of Empire Falls, it was waiting for the magic limousine to come up, write a check, and start the mill that shut down again, right? One of the things that we have against us is that there are empty mills not in operations that are very visible today to people's everyday lives. So you drive by them all the time, and they are a constant reminder of what's not there anymore. Yellow, there's no easy answer to what you're asking other than consistent, multifaceted, ongoing positive sharing of information and stories. As humans, we are programmed to remember the negative. So if someone tells you that, you're ugly, it doesn't matter that 15 other people are going to tell you you're beautiful. Your brain is programmed to remember the negative. And that's true of industry as well as personal, unfortunately. And so the only the combative tactic is an on-purpose, ever-going positive outreach to kind of lay the foundation that when the negative is presented, you've got a wider range of people that can present, let's say, a contrary point of view or details.
All right, we have 2 more minutes. Are there any other questions?
I do see one, Sue, from Raymond that talks about schools, and that's a good point. I know I've only got about a minute and a half, but I want to share that the director of the Maine Tree Foundation does have a student-based curriculum in the schools, and we are in one of the committees working with putting together a scholastic curriculum that will get some of these messages down into earlier points of elementary and junior high so that we can have that as an awareness point of view. Yes.